includes the PNIC 2025, which is the roadmap for development of quality infrastructure. As you know, that's the National Quality Infrastructure Program. And a couple of the themes that they've highlighted, the Mexican government has highlighted in that plan, that program, is mobility and transportation, so going to logistics, energy as a central part of it as well, and then digital transformation and cybersecurity. And these are all three areas where USTDA is helping Mexico and is looking to develop new projects, because we want to help them take the plan to projects, and then those projects gets financed and implemented. And what's great too is we're able to bring that US expertise and solutions to make sure the US is taking advantage of the great bilateral trade that's happening now.
Wonderful, thanks, Keith. I want to go to Juan Antonio, and then Maria Luisa will pick up on this, on cross-border trade flows with you, and even talk some of the transportation. But maybe Juan Antonio, maybe continue to grill you as you were grilled this morning over at the hearings as well. You were over at the International Trade Commission, but over at you as I mentioned, testified this morning. What can you share us a little bit about your testimony as well, and what do you see as the main priorities in your industry? And also, as part of your testimony, can we speak a little bit about you're obviously a Mexican steel company, but also how you see that alignment with some of the what you heard today with some of the U.S. steel companies that were present.
Thank you. Yeah. Greetings. I'm Juan Antonio Rebaulen from the Acero Group, 100% Mexican steel producer with operations in Mexico and also in the U.S. I'm here to contribute our perspective on the U.S.-Mexico economic agenda as a regional manufacturer with operations both sides of the border. It's an honor to join this panel. The Atlantic Council has been a true leader in strengthening the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and I want to thank Jason Marsac and his team for organizing this important discussion. The panel today, we were talking before, was concentrated on how can we strengthen the collaboration between Mexico and the U.S. and also with Canada. And we believe that there's a common issue that we should attend in this new discussion, and that is rules of origin. Rules of origin is something that we need to strengthen. Why am I saying that? When USMCA was put in place, the possibility of bringing steel from other parts of the world and give some change in manufacture, it was enough to say that steel was from the region. And now what we have seen is that that has created an enormous problem in all the region, because the overcapacity that is in China and Asia and some other non-market economies has distorted all the markets, and Mexico and the US and Canada, we are not the exception. So we are now pretty much aligned, US, Mexico, and Canadian producers, on adopting a melt and poured certificate for the region. What does that mean? That the steel that is produced, melted, and poured in the region should not be with any tariff. Well, that is our position. Of course, there are some other opinions, but to be honest, on the steel sector, we don't have at this moment a free trade agreement. We don't have free trade. We have administrative trade. We are paying tariffs, 50% tariffs, national security, 232 tariffs on steel, even though the U.S. producers have a strong surplus with Mexico. It's one of the few sectors, if not the only one, in which the U.S. has a surplus with Mexico. They send much more steel to Mexico than what we send here. 55% of their total exports are going to Mexico. They represent more than 15% of the total consumption of steel in Mexico, when we send steel and we participate with less than 3% of the U.S. market. So those tariffs make no sense for us. We talked about that in the panel. Of course, there were different visions, but the coincidence was that if we strengthen the rules of origin in the region, we will be strengthening the position as a competitive region, the most competitive region in the world to produce steel, because we have everything that other regions don't have. We have energy, we have human capital, we have resources, we have technology. There's a lot of things and a lot of possibilities. So that was the main issue.
Yeah, thanks so much, Juan Antonio. And I think, as you mentioned, as we look ahead to what's going to be on the docket for next year, looking at rules of origin is widely been discussed as something that's going to be looked at as part of the review. Maria Luisa, again, so great to have you here as a frequent customer as well. UPS sits at the center of cross-border trade flows, but you also really see friction points in real time. If you could talk about some of the specific regulatory or operational inefficiencies in customs, border management, or clearance procedures that you think most threatens our competitiveness as a region, and what do you see as some of the reforms that could be implemented under USMCA to reduce some of these delays without, of course, compromising what's so important, which is security?
Jason, thank you so much, and it's really an honor, and I'm honored to be sitting in this panel with all of you. And I love your comments about rules of origin. I'm a customs nerd and a trade nerd, so this is like, I love talking about—
You're in good company.
I know, I love this topic. So before I answer directly your question about what can be done, I think we need to step back and see what we have seen in trade, and what USMCA represents is a reassessment of how trade policy is looked at, right? And so if we talk from a policy perspective, I will divide it in three buckets that we're seeing right now, changes in how trade moves, and then I'm gonna move down to the customs process, which is at the trenches and how that movement happens. So from a trade policy perspective, I will say that now when we talk about trade between all globally and of course within our three countries, one priority, one bucket is about compliance and data. So now the focus is about, are those goods compliant? What is the data that is needed? How will those rules of origin be implemented, right? And what information would be needed? The second bucket is about supply chain security, to your point about, are we keeping security in that process and that movement of the goods? And this is globally, and we can start regionally, of course, within North America. And then the third bucket is about opportunity. What is that? Is strengthening of opportunity from an economic perspective. Notice that I didn't use one word, which was trade facilitation, right? Because I think we have evolved into, if we move data and we are compliant effectively and efficiently, then we should achieve supply chain security, and we should be able to create opportunity and strengthen economic opportunity, which in our old terms was facilitation on that piece. And so I think under that new scheme of conversation, when we're talking about USMCA, and by the way, thank you for your leadership and the voice that the Atlantic Council provides that, and I loved also your comments, your presentation. We have an opportunity right now to look at within those three buckets from a UPS perspective, where logistics, we move goods. I'll give a little bit of framework. We are the largest trucking company in North America. We are the second largest user of rail containers. We're also the second largest air cargo airline. And we're also on the top 5 brokers, customs brokers. And so USMCA, if we look into those three buckets, how we see it has the opportunity to leverage technology to have better compliance regulatory-wise. And finally, I'm a customs nerd. I've been working on customs for the past 25 years. We need the governments to have a heart-to-heart conversation about how can we improve customs processes with technology and resources and align the priorities, right? The priority is compliance and data. Then let's make certain that we have those areas taken care of. And so my nerdiness moment in this answer would be Chapter 7, I know if you cannot sleep between 1 and 2 in the morning, Chapter 7 of USMCA is a good read. Customs and trade facilitation.
This is 1 o'clock in the morning, you said?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
around customs and trade facilitation. But we really need to, USMCA is a gold standard in many areas globally as a trade agreement. We have an opportunity to implement those changes. I went farther.
No, that's perfect. I'm going to go, Fareed, I want to go back to you in Mexico City and bring up this question as well at the same time as I'm doing this, but there we go. I think I did that correctly. Go live. But Fareed, so I want to bring this question that also into my question for you, which is, as we look ahead, what do you see as some of the most relevant opportunities to align both countries in the face of global trends and also the common goal of increasing domestic production? And that goes along with the question from Cesar Fernandez, which is, I won't read the beginning part of it, but really, what are the most immediate steps that we should be taking to strengthen our competitiveness and reduce our reliance on extra-regional actors? So global trends, how do we align our countries and strengthen our own competitiveness?
Thank you, Cesar, and thank you, Jason. This is kind of related with the previous question. I already mentioned how our trade with the U.S. has been increasing and how the trade with China hasn't been growing as fast as this, as the numbers with the U.S. And that is something that we're looking for. There's a lot of alignment in our domestic policies, believe it or not. Plan Mexico, I'm sure you've heard about it. Plan Mexico was announced on January the 13th, and President Trump took office on the 20th, something like that, right? My point is that the Plan Mexico was announced before Trump entered into his second term. And what's Plan Mexico? Plan Mexico is a economic development plan on reindustrialization, on increasing domestic consumption, on increasing domestic production, very similar to what the U.S. is looking for right now. And that's why we have some 15 welfare hubs with tax incentives, immediate deduction to fixed assets. We're trying to streamline investment processes by creating a digital one-stop shop. There are strategic sectors. We have semiconductors. We want to increase the local supply twice. We want to double the local supply, reduce the dependence by 10% through the development of domestic suppliers. And when I say reduce the dependence, I'm not referring to the US, I'm referring to other countries. Also for APIs in the pharma sector, and also we're trying to strengthen the agribusiness by financing the agricultural sector. These are just some examples of how we also want to increase our domestic production and our domestic consumption. Now, you also, and when I say you, I mean the US, want to do that, right? But there are some spaces in these sectors that we cannot do that by ourselves. For example, data centers. You have a lot of technology, you have a lot of the cloud industry, the development of the software. But here in Mexico, we have land, we have energy, we have water. Those data centers can come here. And in that way, keep cybersecurity in the Western Hemisphere. And that's just one example. So if you look at the Plan Mexico and you look to what the US is doing, there's a lot of alignment. And let me give you one last example of this. Just recently, President Sheinbaum introduced a draft decree to Congress that is looking to establish tariffs to non-FTA countries from 10 up to 50% to 1,400 products. So in a way, we're doing the same stuff. We just need to find in which spaces we can complement our strategies. And these are just some examples of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fareed. Keith, Fareed mentioned drilling down on projects, right? And I want to ask you here, project preparation, early stage financing, de-risking infrastructure, they're all key things that USTDA works on. Can you share some of your examples of how tools have been used in Mexico to mobilize public and private capital for things like energy, logistics, digital connectivity as well?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned at the top, our project preparation tools, and I'll get into some examples. I have 3 examples to provide in Mexico in those very areas, Jason. But what they do is they help define the design and technology options for project implementation and then attract financing for that implementation, as I mentioned, and also open the door for the procurement of U.S. goods and services going into that project. The couple examples that I'm able to share today are in the energy sector. We've done a small-scale LNG plants feasibility study, and that was really front-end engineering design for these small LNG plants in about 4 sites throughout Mexico with a private sector project sponsor in Mexico to deliver LNG. As you know, a lot of it comes in, the gas comes in through pipeline, but this is a network that takes it from the pipeline and delivers it to industrial and other customers throughout Mexico. On the logistics side, we're partnering with the state of Chiapas on a intermodal rail terminal. So there's, Mexico has extensive cargo rail network, but there also is they want to develop a little bit more of the connections with Guatemala and the rest of Central America. So this will take some of that line to create a really efficient way for containerized cargo, facilitate the transportation of even more cargo via railways, and enhance the supply chain. And then the last example that I have in digital connectivity is with the state of Tabasco. And so we funded a technical assistance there to help deploy a fiber optic backbone. So that'll create more opportunities for all the populations throughout the state to access the internet. That's not only people in their residences, but also businesses, small and medium and large businesses alike. So you need all these components. As I mentioned, we can help these projects really get off the ground, get financed and implemented with U.S. solutions.
Keith, that's excellent. Those are incredibly important to looking at kind of economic security across North America and the nimbleness and efficiency with which USTDA operates. I have 2 last questions, one for Juan Antonio and then Maria Luisa, then we'll move to our second panel. But Juan Antonio, you mentioned in the outset, your first intervention about rules of origin. You're mentioning rules of origin and steel specifically. But I'd like to ask you how you think we should rethink rules of origin beyond steel to reflect also kind of emerging technologies, right? To batteries, critical minerals, advanced components. How do we think about these types of rules of origin, building on your first answer, while also preventing some of the compliance tensions that could risk fragmenting production between Mexico and the U.S.? So how should we be thinking of this larger ecosystem of increased rules of origin with current products, but also with some of those new technologies that are going to be so pivotal for North America's competitiveness on a global scale?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. It's an important one. I want to refer to Plan Mexico that Farid was talking about, because it's in the center of the discussion when we talk about rules of origin, when we talk about escalation, our production. The main objective of that program, Jason, is to reduce the dependence on technology and imports from other parts of the world, mainly from Asia. In the last 35 years, Mexico was committed with a totally free trade, and more than that, we developed some programs like the IMEX, like the Regla Octava, and some other import programs that fostered the imports from other regions to be transformed in Mexico and then re-export. Now the name of the game is changing, and now we have to produce in our countries and our region. The problem is that part of the Mexican industry was devastated in these 30 years. Many producers changed to convert themselves as importers, and they just assembly, and then that was the name of the game. And now we have to reinstall. We need to reindustrialize our country even before we become an industrialized country. I mean, we deindustrialized before getting industrialized, and now we have to reindustrialize, and we have to make a lot of work, and we cannot do it alone. So what is the situation here? That the USMCA review process is opening a very good opportunity for the three countries to reinforce and strengthen our production chains, but we have to work together. Because if we don't do it, if we break this, if we lose the opportunity, we will not have another chance at making business with other countries. And because we cannot do it alone. I mean, if you analyze what happened with all the growing economies in Asia, Korea, Japan, Singapore, whatever, they had a very strong industrial policy and an alliance with China and with other super economies, and we need to do the same. For example, in the current trade agreement that we have, all the technology transfer and all the cooperation in that matter is pretty much aside. That was not the idea. And now we have, I believe that we have to work a lot on that in this opportunity. We need more investment, we need more development on technology, and we certainly cannot do that just alone.
Thanks, Juan Antonio. Maria Luisa, I'm going to do the last question. As you look ahead to the 2026 review, maybe share with us a little bit of kind of your wish list on what needs to be done to really further accelerate trade facilitation and speedy cross-border commerce.
Yes. Oh boy, a wish list.
You got 2 minutes for the wish list.
I know. You're asking a Colombian to speak in less than 2 minutes. That's a lot if you know Colombians. We speak. I think. Let me say maybe 3 things that I will put on the table for us to consider. As we are, I really appreciate Farid's comments and talking about what the Mexican government is doing. We see what the U.S. government is doing from the business perspective, and I love the investment in infrastructure and what is happening. From a business perspective, we need predictability. We need to know from a manufacturing, to bring the manufacturing here and industrialization, we need to know at the end, what is the end goal, right? And so I think that would be wish number 1, Jason, is to make certain that USMCA is renewed for another 16 years, that we have a clear path in terms of what is being agreed upon so that we don't have the rules of engagement change during the process, because that will help for the investment in manufacturing and moving process. The second wish is related to customs, because I'm a customs nerd, as I mentioned, and customs is important. As much as policy is important, you need to move your good. And if your technology is not working and the infrastructure is not there or the staffing is not there, that is a challenge. And so I think CBP, CBSA, and ANAM and SAT need to sit together and have a cup of aguardiente, no, I'm kidding, vino, tequila, you choose whatever you want, coffee, water, but we need to have more cooperation and best practices amongst the 3 agencies, because not only infrastructure is needed, but now remember the bucket that I mentioned about compliance and data, that's real, that's a big one. And then the last one, I know, I'm running out. I think my 3rd wish list would be that, as USMCA did for the first time, introducing a chapter focused on SMEs, in small and medium-sized enterprises, we need to continue to allow for the movement of SMBs, meaning have regulations to be clear and transparent and have a predictable process, because SMBs don't have consultants and a lot of money. So I think we need to remember SMBs are important in the region, and we have to allow that facilitation.
SMBs are the backbone of our economies, right? Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. I think takeaways, opportunities with USMCA strengthen our competitiveness, our own economic security, and I think Keith's important points of the role of specific projects, the role of USTDA and helping to finance and get those specific projects off the ground. So thank you. Fareed, thanks for joining us from Mexico City. Well, I'm now going to hand it over to my colleague, Enrique Millan Mejia, our resident senior fellow for economic policy. He's going to moderate a conversation on exploring untapped opportunities for alignment and growth. And before doing so, the answer on the edible soccer ball is that it's a cake. So thank you so much for joining us for this first panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Let's continue the second part of today's event. So we're going to talk about the exploring untapped opportunities for alignment and growth on the U.S.-Mexico relationship. I'm honored here to be with this extraordinary panel of people that are joining us from Mexico City. It's an honor to be with Luis Rosendo Gutierrez, who is the Undersecretary of Foreign Trade, representing the Ministry of Economy of the Government of Mexico. I'm here with David Goldwyn, who is the Chairman of the Energy Advisory Group at the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council, but he's also our non-resident senior fellow at the Adrian Ars Latin America Center. And Kevin Doyle, Director of International Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers. And finally, joining us from New York, Christy Pelecchia. She's the founder and principal of Pelecchia International. She's also a very important stakeholder of our center, being the member of the Americas Economic Security Group at the Latin America Center, and also a member of our U.S.-Colombia Advisory Group. Thank you all for being here today. It is an honor to have you on board on this conversation. And I would like to start the conversation with David. David, there's a lot of space in the U.S.-Mexico energy field and U.S.-Mexico energy cooperation. How would you characterize the current state of that cooperation model? And where do you see the most realistic opportunities for deeper integration in the near term?
Great. Thanks, Enrique, for the question, and hats off to the Center for having this event. I think to take a step back, the USMCA has really been fantastic for energy trade, and particularly for the United States. Mexico is our #1 product destination, almost 1.2 million barrels a day equivalent of product. It's our #1 destination for gas. I think it's 6.5 billion cubic feet a day and rising. We still get about a little under less than 500,000 barrels a day of oil, now subject to a little bit of a tariff, coming from Mexico, so it's declining, but still pretty important for our refineries, and we trade a little bit of electricity. So the trade story has been great and really important for the U.S. industry, because without Mexico, even U.S. oil production relies on disposing of that associated gas. So it's really important, and huge opportunities for growth. To the extent that Mexico is investable, and there are more manufacturing plants, there's more investment there, they're all going to need electricity. That electricity is going to be both renewable and it's going to be gas. But gas is going to be really critical, and it's critical for for other downstream products as well. So a lot of opportunity there. Investment, not so good. And that's largely because the changes in Mexico, which have led to CFE and Pemex, the national champions, really having pride of place. It's a problem for USMCA because U.S. companies are not getting national treatment. And so it's really bad for Mexico, which pays 3 times as much for electricity on average as the United States, twice as much as China and India. Really bad from a competitive point of view. So I think there's a lot to be done there. We're not going to change the framework in Mexico. That's not going to change. But what can change is permitting. You can get product in faster. You can get equal treatment for who puts gas on the network. You can probably have a little bit more flexibility on the electricity side, which we can talk about later. So there is potential there, I think, within the existing framework, but there's more that could be done.
Thank you, David. And Undersecretary Gutierrez, thank you for joining us from Mexico City. As you are aware, yesterday and today, the United States Trade Representative has been developing a group of hearings about the USMCA review. I understand that in Mexico, your ministry did quite the same thing in a different approach. You cover 60 roundtables with multi-sectoral stakeholders across the Mexican Republic, but also you decided also to include the regional and the sectoral perspective. What were some of the key takeaways of those roundtables, and how do you think those takeaways can be implemented as part of the review?
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. Very busy days here in Mexico City. We are working right now with the tariff package in the Congress. I'm just coming back from the Congress. And I think that this package is part of this discussion about the 60 forums that we have in the last 90 days. We have been discussing so many things about the future of our region. I think that the main consensus is that the USMCA should be maintained and should be strengthened and upgrade. But I think that there were so many proposals trying to advance in the new economic era that we are living. And the proposals are very interesting. For example, let me tell you something. There are several companies or industries that are just working on the input replacement program, trying to bring to North America, not only Mexico, but it's United States, Mexico, and Canada, and trying to bring some inputs here to produce. Of course, it's impossible to bring everything from Asia, but the industries are starting to review their processes and trying to bring some components and inputs from Asia. So about these 60 forums, we have very good and positive proposals, and we were talking a lot about this input replacement program.
Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. Kevin, a similar question connecting with the USMCA review. I know the National Association of Manufacturers has been also participating actively in this review. How are the U.S. manufacturers thinking about the future of the North American trade? Did you see in the review opportunities for better integration between both manufacturing sectors in Mexico and in the U.S.?
Well, thanks for having me here, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for the invitation. And for those who maybe aren't familiar with the National Association of Manufacturers, we're the leading voice in the industry for the 13 million people who make things here in the United States. We represent companies big and small across all 50 states and in every sector of the manufacturing industry. And I guess just to start, I mean, one thing that's really important to underline about USMCA, and this is a big part of the message that we conveyed during our testimony to USTR this morning, is that USMCA is the most pro-US manufacturing trade agreement that's ever existed, that we've seen anywhere in all of history. And the story of American manufacturing and the companies that we represent is really a story of North American manufacturing. The regional co-production model that has been enabled by the USMCA has been just a boon for manufacturing in the United States, to the tune of $2.9 trillion in contribution to GDP last year. And as I know that Jason and Fareed and some folks on the first panel pointed out, That trade with Mexico and Canada is just so important. We already said 1/3 of all U.S. goods exports go to Mexico and Canada. Just to pile on some additional statistics to support that, when we added it up, Mexico and Canada combined as export markets for U.S. goods are more than the next 12 trading partners combined. And the amount of trade that happens between U.S., Mexico, and Canada, we crunched the numbers, is up to $2.8 million per minute. We didn't calculate that by second. We thought that'd be a little bit too absurd, but you can imagine it's still quite high. And for most sectors that make up the manufacturing industry, the subsectors that are part of that, Mexico and Canada are their top markets. And since USMCA went into effect, 16 of those 21 subsectors have seen faster, in some cases significantly faster export growth to Mexico and Canada than they've seen to the rest of the world. So that trade is just so important, both as a place for the things that we make here to go, but then also to your question about regional integration. So much of that trade is also helping us make stuff here. 72% of U.S. imports from Canada and 63% of imports from Mexico are industrial inputs, either capital goods, so equipment, machinery that we install on the factory floors here in the United States, or they're intermediate goods, the types of components, materials, things that go into making stuff here. And the close integration that we already have, we looked at some of the numbers about the degree of trade that is done between related parties. So essentially, trade that's conducted between companies that share a corporate structure, are either wholly or partially owned by the same parent company, is to the tune of $600 billion a year. And so for our perspective, this integration is already incredibly strong. It's an engine of manufacturing, dominance that we want to keep humming. And so our main message to USTR is keep that engine humming and look for targeted improvements that can make it stronger.
Thank you, Kevin. And I think you made a great point there. And it is that one of the best outcomes of USMCA is that the three countries have been providing interdependence on not only to their supply chains, but also to their manufacturing sector. I would like to do something very similar to what Jason did on the previous panel, and I have a question for Christy that is very connected with a question that we have here from the audience. So let me see if we have it here. Now, I'm going to read it, but I will frame it this way. Christy, traditionally, Mexico has been a major recipient of U.S. foreign direct investment. We are currently talking about trade and investment from an America First perspective. How do you think Mexico can play a greater role in U.S. reindustrialization and helping the U.S. economic security? And I will touch base on what someone from the audience here, Ignacio, is asking us. What sectors can be boosted so that we can see greater co-production that uses more American inputs in North American manufacturing?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Enrique, and thank you to the Atlantic Council and to my co-panelists. So Mexico has been a large recipient of U.S. FDI, but a couple of things to keep in mind. So of the, and Luis, please feel free to jump in. I'm sure you have other figures, but of the $39 billion that was invested in 2024, only 10% went into new investment. And so when you look at FDI, it actually went down by 34% from 23 to 24, new FDI investment. And a lot of this investment is concentrated within a few sectors: automotive, aerospace, telecom, financial services, and electronics. And so I think there's an opportunity, right, to expand that to the other question, and we'll talk about that. And if Mexico wants to meaningfully grow and be a part of the America's First plan, as well as to achieve its own nearshoring goals, I think it's going to have to attract FDI into new investment. And in order to do that, I think it will have to do a couple things. I think the first one, and David hit on this when he talked about the energy sector. They've got to get certainty of contracts down. Investors need to know that if they have a contract, it's going to be honored. Rule of law, relatedly, rule of law is important. I think, within the last year, concerns over judicial reform are growing. And the third is security. I think so. Mexico, I think, needs to address those three things. I also think, from the U.S. perspective, I think we need to work with the private sector to figure out how, because U.S. investors, they want to invest because the returns are greater, because it makes strategic sense. And so how can U.S. companies integrate with Mexico to improve their supply chains, to improve their vertical integration in a way that's mutually beneficial. And back, talking about energy for a second, I think, just to drill down on that a little bit more, in addition to some of the points that David made, at the very beginning of AMLO sexenio, the airport was canceled, right? We had all the investors lined up, everybody was ready to go, and the airport got canceled. That's another contract that, gives investors pause. And so that's something that needs to be addressed. I know that President Sheinbaum has implemented some reforms in the energy space, which David can touch on, but a lot of the details need to be ironed out. And I think the proof is in the pudding, which is why we don't see the investment coming in. When you look at a couple of the sectors, other sectors where we could be present, I think the first one is gas. I mean, Mexico, and David mentions too, imports a significant amount of gas from the United States. Energy needs associated with nearshoring, if nearshoring, becomes what everyone believes it could be, the energy needs are going to be in the tens of billions of dollars. Add on top of that AI and the energy that's needed to power that, it's serious, it's significant. And related to that, I think data centers are another area where we could expand. They're a core competence that the U.S. has. Then I think with respect to other forms of clean energy, which is obviously a sector that's important to President Sheinbaum, microgrids and other forms of modular energy could potentially be another area. And then lastly, I think pharmaceutical and vaccine production is another one. I mean, the United States, and Enrique, we were talking about this a few weeks ago, the United States, after COVID, indicated that there's a real desire to shift its pharmaceutical and supply chain away from China. And I think, Mexico, given its manufacturing expertise as well as its proximity to the U.S., makes a lot of sense. And I know I've just seen some announcements come out from the State Department about the America First global health strategy, and it looks like, it's pretty basic at the moment in terms of it, includes commodities and other basic products. That would be an obvious area where Mexico, as a manufacturer, could play a role. And I would think taking it a step further, the United States could really become, which has pharmaceutical companies that are very strong. That's an area of potential collaboration going forward.
Thank you, Christy. I have a last round of questions for all the panelists before we can go and enjoy the edible soccer ball that Jason announced. So let's start with Undersecretary Gutierrez. Mr. Undersecretary, during the first panel, both Juan Orlando and also Farid from Mexico City mentioned Plan Mexico. I know this is the cornerstone of President Sheinbaum's investment and growth strategy. How do you think Plan Mexico can benefit from the updated or review version of USMCA?
Yes, I think that is a very good question. I think that right now we are receiving the first effects on our economy. Answering a little about the Christie comments, let me tell you that the last data that we have in foreign direct investment is the highest in the Mexican history. I agree with Christy that we need new investments because most of the foreign direct investment right now are in another fields. But let me say that the new investments in Mexico from 2024 to 2025 more than triple in the last data. And the percentage or the proportion of the new investments went from around 7% of the total foreign direct investment towards almost 16%. We need to increase the new investment, but I think that we are in the trend. The other thing that I would like to say is that it's very interesting because we are seeing a double vision about the Mexican economy. The foreign investor is believing in Mexico, and I think that they are working in several projects. Actually, we are receiving so many American and Canadian companies right now, but the problem that we have is with the national investment, with the national industry, and they are more worried about these economic and judicial reforms that is talking Christie. But let me tell you that in the discussions with Secretary Lutnick and Ambassador Greer, we never talk about judiciary reform. They are not worried about it, not at all. They have some doubts about the energy reform. Right now, they are positive about the reforms. We are in a constant contact with the Undersecretary of Energy of the United States, and they are looking for several projects in the south border of the United States. So all these issues are very, very important for Plan Mexico. I'm pretty sure that when we have this upgrade of the USMCA, we will delete or erase the levels of high uncertainty that we have right now in the region. And we hope, and we are expecting that for the second half of 2026, Mexico will start to growth at another pace and another level.
Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. David, Christie mentioned that certainly energy is a big driver for reindustrialization. I would like to ask you for two opportunities and two challenges that the energy cooperation between U.S. and Mexico can face or can take advantage of during the USMCA review and after receiving that feedback.
Two opportunities and two challenges. Okay, well, first, I think the administration, the Sheinbaum administration, gets credit for Plan Mexico for making room for the private sector, for their call for 7 gigawatts right now of private sector participation, and for their very ambitious targets for transmission. So the goals are good, but the two biggest challenges, first, are the judicial review. And frankly, the U.S. administrations, particularly Greer and before him, are not really that interested in promoting foreign investment in other countries. They're promoting foreign investment in the United States. And so ISDS is really important because you have to give investors confidence. And so that's the one challenge. The other big challenge on energy is the framework. The electricity law is extremely cumbersome, less than 1 gigawatt of self-supply. You cannot be a hyperscaler with less than 1 gigawatt of electricity and build your own plant. The other is that it requires 54% CFE investment, and CFE lost $14 billion in 2024. That's more than their ambitions in Plan Mexico. So the problem is you can't build it on your own. You have to have CFE's investment. You have to be in their plan in advance. And we're going to see on December 12th whether this first tranche works. So the framework is a big challenge. Judicial reform is a big challenge. The opportunities, I think, in USMCA are strengthen ISDS, and I would say this will not come from USDR, which doesn't support it because it strengthens investment overseas. This needs to come from Mexico. It'll come from U.S. industry and Mexican industry, but this needs to be held out as a carrot for foreign investment. And the other, I have more than one other opportunity, but I would say, resolve the existing disputes to show that investor-state dispute resolution actually means something. Zero tariffs, that goes for both sides, including on services, so that we can bring services over there to build things that we need to build. And I would say equal treatment for U.S. companies and foreign companies when it comes to environmental compliance. We've got to get back to something that resembles national treatment. I think if you put those together, that strong investment signal, then you might build some confidence to invest in energy. If you don't, you won't.
Thank you, David. Kevin, back to you. Artificial intelligence, automation, data governance, and many other things represents big opportunities, but also big challenges for the manufacturing sector, taking into account that many times technology goes at a faster speed than regulation adjustments. how the U.S. manufacturers are viewing this USMCA review as an opportunity to tackle those challenges and take advantages of those opportunities.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I mean, manufacturing is at really a core nexus of the issues that are kind of circulating around artificial intelligence. I know mostly when we think about AI, we think about like chatbots and videos of like buff dogs, but actually manufacturers are like huge adopters of artificial intelligence, and we talk to our members all the time, we're seeing incredible innovations on factory floors all across the country as to how they're using artificial intelligence to do things like improving the efficiency of their production processes, raising the safety, identifying and mitigating potential risks to employee safety and making sure our workers on the factory floor don't get hurt. Accelerating this pace at which products are able to be designed and the life cycle of getting new innovative products onto the marketplace. As a tool for training, I mean, we talk a lot about how there's a huge skills gap in the manufacturing sector. Artificial intelligence is an incredible tool for training and upskilling workers. And then also, I mean, I know a couple of folks on the previous panel were talking about supply chain resilience. That's a huge issue for a lot of folks right now. AI and the use of data to help increase the transparency and the visibility into complex supply chains is just, companies are doing this left and right. And so, and then I'd also just say, we obviously think about AI as like a software, it's a digital thing, but there's also real physical stuff that goes into producing and deploying leading edge artificial intelligence. You've got GPUs, you've got semiconductors and servers, but you also have things like cooling systems, transformers, power systems, even just concrete and steel that goes into building a data center. All of that is manufacturing. And so that's, as we've been looking at the USMCA review, we've been trying to think about how to put AI and manufacturers right at the forefront. A couple things come to mind. One, the free flow of industrial data is just so important, especially for that supply chain issue. Luckily, USMCA already has incredibly strong digital trade provisions, and so we think those should be sustained, maintained, as appropriate, increased and strengthened. But more importantly than anything, and this is something that I think gets to some things that some of my fellow panelists have said, there's already a lot of things across a wide range of issues in the agreement that already exist. We have to just enforce them, right? We have to use the existing structures, dispute settlement mechanisms, committees, working groups that already exist to raise these issues and push them forward. And then on the, we think they see a lot of opportunity to use the kind of AI boom to scale manufacturing that can support that. And so, the NAM has been very supportive, and manufacturers across the country commended the administration for putting out its AI action plan over the summer. There's a lot of things in there that reflect the priorities of manufacturers, things like permitting reform, finding ways to accelerate and catalyze more investment into critical infrastructure that supports AI. And so we think that's a great opportunity for closer collaboration with Mexico and Canada. It could be an AI initiative under the auspices of the North American Competitiveness Committee. Perhaps we could use some of the great resources at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency to help fund those projects. And we actually think there's an opportunity there to invite Canada and Mexico to sign on to the action plan, because ultimately, if we're going to, this is a race for AI dominance, and that's a clear priority for this administration, and we think that North America can be, and the USMCA thereunder, can be a strong foundation to win that race.
Great, thank you, Kevin. One last question for you, Christy. I know everybody is excited about the edible soccer ball that is waiting for us outside, but Christy, as you know, there are a couple of bills moving along Congress in different stages. One is the DFC reauthorization, and the other one is a discussion around the Americas Act bill. How these two tools can improve Mexico's greater role in U.S. reindustrialization and helping to strengthen U.S. economic security.
Okay. Thank you. And you can have my piece, Enrique.
Absolutely.
Unless you're going to sit with me, you have my piece of cake. A couple of things just to highlight. I think prior to 2018, the development banks didn't have a meaningful role in areas like energy and infrastructure because the private sector was playing a bigger role in these areas. IFC announced recently that it would fund an incremental US $3 billion into Mexico in a single year, its largest ever. And keep in mind that today the DFC's portfolio in Mexico is around $1.5 billion. So I think the development banks play a big role in taking the risks that no one else wants to take to kind of open, right? And the DFC has always been a proponent of bringing private sector investment alongside of it, right? So it's not a silver bullet. It's not meant to replace this private sector. It's meant to work with the private sector to bring the trillions of dollars potentially that come from the U.S. capital markets into other projects. And so the DFC reauthorization, I think, is going to address a few really important areas that could affect that could be helpful in Mexico. The first one is removing the confusion around investing in UPICs in upper middle income countries. We are in an upper middle income hemisphere. Mexico is an upper middle income country, so it's important that everyone understands that we can invest there and what the parameters will be. I can't underscore how important that is. Deal inertia is not a good thing, and gridlock in DC is not just from driving. It happens when people don't understand priorities, and I think that will go a long way. I think the ability to take financial positions in Mexican pesos is going to be really important. DFC has the authority unlike its predecessor OPIC. However, the way the mechanisms for doing that are so expensive that, from a practical perspective, they don't have the authority, and so that's going to allow the U.S. government to provide financing in Mexican pesos, which is predominantly what's used. Outside of commodities deals, you're not financing things in Mexico with dollars. The equity authorization, I think, especially for sectors. I mean, we talked about energy and infrastructure, where U.S. companies do not have a large presence at the moment. I think the U.S. government investing equity into these projects can be helpful. I mean, one of the, I was talking with a client, and I understand that, some of the ways that U.S. investors are getting around the issue of judicial reform is that they are setting up frameworks so that their investments are protected under international arbitration. Mexican investors don't have that option, right? They're kind of stuck with Mexican law. And so I think to the extent that the U.S. government can provide equity checks into projects in Mexico, that can also help other investors get comfortable with the projects. And with regard to the Americas Act, I think, clarity of vision and strategy of purpose is huge. I was there when the DMC was created, and I think confusion in any business is never a good thing. And so to the extent, that the Americas Act is providing direction around areas that are important to the United States, like critical minerals or energy, I think that can go a long way. And I think, when we look at mining, which is, a sector that's important to the United States and mineral security, Mexico has provides a lot of minerals that could be helpful, like copper and gold. And so I think that provides some direction that will be really important to help a partnership move forward in these areas and to allow the United States to have access to some of these critical minerals in a way that is in line with investor needs. I think security is another big concern, particularly in the mining sector, and that's not specific to Mexico. That's all over the Americas. And so I think having the ability to use the DFC for things like political risk insurance to allow the U.S. government or the DFC to take some of the risk out of the projects, I think that will be incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Christy. We're out of time, but I would like to summarize very quickly. The USMCA review is a great opportunity to ratify the importance of this trade pact in order to provide predictability for business, but also to ensure that the interdependence of the three economies can continue moving along and that can guarantee jobs at every single country that is part of the trade pact. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you to our dear panelists. And now, finally, I invite you to enjoy our edible cake at our Sky Lobby. Thank you so much.
All right.